The graduation ceremony at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado was supposed to be a celebration. Families packed the bleachers, cameras flashed, and proud instructors prepared to hand out the coveted Trident pins that marked the completion of the most grueling military training in the world. But when they called the name of the honor graduate, the recruit who had finished first in the most elite program the Navy had to offer, a stunned silence fell over the crowd. Emma Collins stepped forward, her small frame barely filling out. The crisp white uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. At 5'4" and 125 pounds, she looked more like someone who belonged in a college library than on a battlefield. The same instructors who had spent months calling her hopeless, a waste of resources, and the diversity hire who'd wash out by week 2, now had to pin the honor graduate insignia on her chest. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that Emma Collins wasn't just any recruit. She was a ghost, a phantom who had deliberately buried her past so deep that even military intelligence couldn't find it. The woman they had mocked, humiliated, and written off had been hiding a secret that would have changed everything if they had known it from day one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Bus rumbled through the gates of Naval Amphibious Base, Coronado, at 0530 hours on a fog-shrouded Monday morning in March. Inside, 23 recruits sat in nervous silence, each carrying their own dreams of joining the most elite fighting force in the world. At the back of the bus, pressed against the window like she was trying to disappear, sat Emma Collins. She carried a single duffel bag that looked like it had seen better days, her paperwork folded neatly in a manila envelope that she clutched with both hands. While other recruits compared college athletics achievements and prior military experience, Maya remained silent, her dark eyes taking in every detail of the base through the salt-stained window. "Look at this," whispered Jake Morrison, a former college football player from Texas, whose biceps strained against his civilian clothes. "They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now." He nodded toward Emma with a smirk that his buddy, Tyler Brooks, a former Marine who'd volunteered for SEAL training, found amusing. $5 says she's gone by the end of Hell Week," Tyler murmured back, loud enough for Maya to hear. "My little sister's bigger than that." Maya's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her envelope, but her expression never changed. She'd heard worse, much worse. In places where words were the least dangerous thing flying through the air. When the bus stopped, Instructor Chief Petty Officer Marcus Kane was waiting. A mountain of a man with 22 years of SEAL experience etched into every line of his weathered face. Kane had the kind of presence that made grown men reconsider their life choices. His voice, when it erupted across the compound, could probably be heard 3 counties away, off the bus. "Move! Move!" The recruits scrambled, their nervousness cranking up to full-blown terror as Kane's voice seemed to physically assault them. They formed a ragged line, trying to stand at attention while Kane stalked back and forth like a predator sizing up his prey. "Welcome to Naval Special Warfare Training," Kane announced, his voice dropping to a level that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. "Most of you will quit. Most of you will discover that wanting to be a SEAL and actually being a SEAL are 2 very different things. Some of you," his eyes swept the line, pausing for a fraction of a second on Emma, "probably shouldn't have bothered getting off the bus." The initial processing was a blur of paperwork, medical checks, and gear issue. Emma moved through each station with quiet efficiency, answering questions in a soft voice that barely carried beyond the person she was speaking to. When asked about her motivation for seeking SEAL training, she simply said, "To serve." It was during the physical assessment that the first real problems began. The initial fitness test was designed to weed out those who weren't ready for the intensity of SEAL training. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, a 4-mile run, and a swimming test that left most recruits gasping. Emma's performance was adequate. She met the minimum standards, but just barely. Her push-up form was perfect, but she struggled to reach the recommended numbers. Her run time was respectable for a civilian, but slow by SEAL standards. It was enough to pass, but not enough to impress anyone. "Collins," Instructor Kane called out as she finished her swimming test, water dripping from her small frame. "You planning on swimming like that when bullets are flying? Because last time I checked, the enemy doesn't wait for you to catch your breath." "No, Instructor Kane," Emma replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I can't hear you." "No, Instructor Kane." Kane studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "We'll see, Collins, we'll see." That first night in the barracks, Emma unpacked her few belongings into the small locker assigned to her. Unlike the other recruits who had photos of girlfriends, family, and college achievements, Emma's personal items were sparse. A few changes of civilian clothes, basic toiletries, and a small leather journal that she kept locked in the bottom of her locker. Her bunkmate was Sarah Chun, a former Army officer who had impressed everyone during the day's activities. Sarah was friendly enough, but even she seemed puzzled by Emma's presence. "So what's your background?" Sarah asked as they prepared for lights out. "College sports? Military experience?" Emma pulled her blanket up to her chin, her voice barely audible in the dark. "Just trying to serve my country." It was a non-answer, and Sarah knew it, but something in Emma's tone suggested that pushing for more information wouldn't be welcomed. The trouble really started during the second week of training. Instructor Lieutenant Commander David Harrison had taken a particular interest in making Emma's life difficult. Harrison was younger than Kane, a former SEAL officer who had been medically retired after an injury, but had stayed on as an instructor. He carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had something to prove, and Emma had become his favorite target. "Collins," Harrison's voice cut across the training compound as Emma struggled through rope climbing exercises. "My grandmother could climb faster than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. The other recruits tried not to watch as Emma attempted the climb again, her small hands struggling to maintain grip on the thick rope. She made it to the top eventually, but her time was well below the standard expected of SEAL candidates. "Again," Harrison commanded. "And this time, try to remember that SEALs are supposed to be elite warriors, not weekend warriors." Emma climbed again. And again. By the fourth attempt, her hands were raw and bleeding, but she completed the climb without complaint. The other recruits had moved on to other exercises, but Harrison kept Emma on the ropes until long after the sun had set. It was during chow that the real harassment began. Emma sat alone, as she often did, working through her meal with the methodical precision of someone who understood that food was fuel, nothing more. Jake Morrison and his group of followers had been watching her struggle through training all week, and their comments were becoming bolder. "I don't get why they even let her try," Morrison said, loud enough for the entire mess hall to hear. "This isn't some diversity program. People's lives depend on us knowing our teammates can handle the pressure." Tyler Brooks nodded in agreement. "She's going to get someone killed. Maybe herself, maybe someone else. Either way, she doesn't belong here." Emma continued eating, her expression never changing, but her grip on her fork tightened slightly. "Hey, Collins," Morrison called directly to her. "You planning on quitting soon, or are you going to wait until you actually endanger someone?" For the first time since arriving at the compound, Emma looked up. Her dark eyes met Morrison's across the mess hall, and something passed between them, a look that made Morrison's confident smirk falter slightly. "I'm not quitting," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet room. "What was that?" Morrison stood up, emboldened by his audience. "Speak up, recruit." Emma stood as well, her small frame dwarfed by Morrison's bulk, but her voice never wavered. "I said I'm not quitting." The tension in the mess hall was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other recruits had stopped eating to watch the confrontation, sensing that something significant was happening. But before it could escalate further, Instructor Kane appeared in the doorway. "Problem here, recruits?" Kane's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "No problem, Instructor Kane," Morrison said quickly. Sitting back down. Emma remained standing for a moment longer, her eyes still locked on Morrison's, before she too sat down and returned to her meal. But the damage was done. Lines had been drawn, and Emma Collins had just painted a target on her back that would make the next phase of training even more difficult than it already was. What none of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that Emma Collins had faced down much worse than a group of overgrown bullies. In places where the wrong look could mean death, where silence was the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, where she had learned that sometimes the smallest person in the room was the most dangerous. Emma treaded water, her small frame working harder than the others to maintain position in the choppy surf. "No, sir. I can't hear you. No, sir." But Emma's struggles in the water were becoming impossible to hide. While Morrison and the other larger recruits powered through the waves with relative ease, Emma was burning energy at twice the rate, just to keep up. Her technique was flawless, her underwater navigation was actually superior to most of the crew, but her size was a factor that no amount of determination could completely overcome. It was during the log carry evolution that Morrison decided to make his move. Each boat crew had to carry a 200-pound log for 5 miles across beach sand, taking turns supporting the weight on their shoulders. The exercise was designed to test teamwork and mental toughness, but Morrison saw an opportunity for something else. "Look, Collins," Morrison said as they hoisted the log for the 3rd mile. "You're holding us back. We get it, you want to prove a point about women in combat. But this isn't about politics. This is about people's lives." Emma said nothing, her shoulder burning under the weight of the log, her breathing controlled despite the strain. Tyler Brooks, positioned behind her, picked up Morrison's thread. "We're trying to help you here. You could get out with honor. Say you gave it your best shot. No one would blame you." Still Emma remained silent, her legs continuing their steady rhythm across the sand. "Hey," Morrison's voice sharpened. "I'm talking to you." Emma's response was barely audible over the sound of waves and heavy breathing. "I'm not quitting." "What?" "I said I'm not quitting." Morrison's frustration boiled over. "You're being selfish. You think this is about you, but what happens when we're in a real situation? What happens when we need to carry a wounded teammate and you can't pull your weight?" For the first time, Emma turned her head to look directly at Morrison, her dark eyes steady despite the pain etched across her face. "Then I'll find a way." Something in her tone, a quiet certainty that went beyond mere determination, made Morrison hesitate. But before he could respond, Instructor Kane appeared alongside their crew, jogging effortlessly in full gear. "Problem with the teamwork, boat crew?" Kane asked, his voice deceptively casual. "No problem, Instructor Kane," Morrison replied quickly. Kane's experienced eyes took in the tension between the crew members, the way Emma had isolated herself at the front of the log, the barely controlled anger in Morrison's posture. "Collins, you keeping up with your team?" "Yes, Instructor Kane." "Good, because the team moves at the speed of its slowest member. And if the team fails, everyone fails. Everyone understand that?" A chorus of "Yes, Instructor Kane" echoed across the beach, but Kane wasn't finished. "Morrison, you're the boat crew leader. That means Collins's success is your responsibility. Her failure is your failure. You getting that?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "Yes, Instructor Kane." "Outstanding. Double time for the last 2 miles. What Morrison didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that Emma Collins had carried much heavier loads across much more dangerous terrain, in places where the weight on her shoulders hadn't been a training log. but wounded soldiers whose lives depended on her reaching an extraction point. Where failure meant death, not just a failed exercise, the night evolution pushed the recruits to their breaking point. Cold, wet, and exhausted after 18 hours of continuous training, they were tasked with a navigation exercise through the base obstacle course, using only compass and minimal lighting. The course was designed to be nearly impossible under normal conditions, but after a full day of physical stress, it became a test of pure mental fortitude. Emma moved through the obstacles with methodical precision, while other recruits crashed through barriers and stumbled over rope climbs. She seemed to flow around challenges, finding efficient paths that conserved energy. Her small size, which had been a disadvantage in the water and with the log carry, became an advantage in tight spaces and balanced critical obstacles. Lieutenant Commander Harrison watched her progress through night vision scopes, his expression growing more frustrated with each successful navigation point she completed. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to break, to wash out, to prove his point about women in special operations. "Collins," Harrison's voice crackled through the radio headset each recruit wore. "You're moving too slow. Pick up the pace." Emma was actually ahead of the recommended timeline, but she didn't respond to the criticism. She simply continued moving through the course with the same steady efficiency. It was at the rope bridge, a particularly challenging obstacle that required crossing a 30-foot gap using only rope handholds, that Harrison decided to intervene directly. As Emma began her crossing, Harrison activated a system that added unpredictable swaying motion to the ropes, simulating combat conditions. Emma felt the rope begin to move beneath her hands and instantly adjusted, her movements becoming more fluid rather than rigid. She seemed to read the motion of the rope, working with its movement rather than fighting against it. Her crossing time actually improved under the challenging conditions. Harrison stared at his stopwatch in disbelief. That kind of adaptive movement under stress took years to develop. It wasn't something a civilian recruit should possess. The final test of the 24-hour evolution was what the instructors called surf torture, lying in the frigid Pacific surf while waves crashed over the recruits for an hour. The exercise was designed to test mental resilience when physical comfort was impossible. The recruits lay side by side in the shallows, arms linked, as wave after wave of 40-degree water pounded their bodies. One by one, recruits began to shake uncontrollably as hypothermia set in. Two rang the bell that would end their suffering and their SEAL dreams. Emma lay between Sarah Chun and a recruit named Marcus Williams, her small body disappearing under each wave. But while the larger recruits thrashed and fought against the cold, Emma seemed to have found a different strategy. She controlled her breathing, relaxing into the rhythm of the waves rather than tensing against them. How is she doing that? Sarah whispered through chattering teeth during a brief lull between wave sets. Emma's voice was barely audible over the sound of crashing water. Don't fight what you can't change. Save your energy for what you can control. It was advice that seemed to come from hard-won experience, not theoretical knowledge. When the hour finally ended, Emma was one of only 7 recruits who completed the exercise without ringing the bell. She stood on shaking legs, water streaming from her small frame, but her eyes were clear and focused. Chief Kane studied the survivors with something approaching respect. You 7 just passed your first real test. Tomorrow we begin Hell Week. Preparation in earnest. As the recruits stumbled toward the barracks, Emma noticed Morrison watching her with a different expression than before. Not the dismissive contempt of earlier weeks, but something closer to puzzled recognition. She'd done more than just survive the 24-hour evolution. She'd thrived under conditions that had broken larger, stronger recruits. Back in the barracks, as the survivors tried to warm themselves and process what they'd just endured, Sarah Chun approached Emma's bunk. That thing you said in the water, Sarah began quietly, about not fighting what you can't change. That's not something you learn in basic training. Emma was toweling off her hair, her movements precise and economical. Everyone learns to survive. Differently. No, Sarah pressed. That was something else. That was experience talking. Emma met Sarah's eyes for a moment, and Sarah saw something there that made her take a step back. A depth of knowledge that didn't match Emma's age or supposed background. Get some sleep, Sarah, Emma said softly. Tomorrow's going to be harder. But sleep didn't come easily for any of them. In bunks around the barracks, recruits stared at the ceiling, replaying the day's events, wondering if they had what it would take to continue. Some were already mentally composing the letters they would write home, explaining why they decided to quit. Emma lay in her bunk, staring up at the same ceiling, but her thoughts were elsewhere. In places where staying warm meant life or death. Where navigation errors led to ambushes, where the sound of approaching helicopters could mean rescue or disaster depending on which flag they flew. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the small leather journal she kept hidden there. In the dim light filtering through the barracks windows, she wrote a single line. Day 21. 7 left. The easy part is over. Then she closed the journal, tucked it away, and finally allowed herself to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities for Morrison and the others to discover that Emma Collins was far more than she appeared to be. Asterisk. What none of them realized was that Hell Week itself would pale in comparison to the storm that was building. Because someone had begun asking questions about Emma Collins's background, and the answers they were finding would change everything. Hell Week started at 2,300 hours on a Sunday night, with the sound of machine gun fire, explosions, and instructors screaming through bullhorns. Emma jolted awake in her bunk as smoke grenades detonated throughout the barracks, filling the air with thick, choking clouds that sent recruits stumbling blindly toward the exits. Everybody out! Move! Move! The chaos was intentional and overwhelming. Recruits crashed into walls, tripped over each other, and emerged from the barracks in various states of undress, coughing, and disoriented. Through the artificial fog, Emma could make out the silhouettes of instructors positioned around the compound like an occupying army. Chief Kane's voice boomed through the speakers mounted around the training area. Welcome to Hell Week, ladies. For the next 5 days and 6 nights, you will be cold, wet, sandy, and miserable. You will get maybe 4 hours of sleep total. You will question every decision that brought you to this moment. Most of you will quit. The 7 remaining recruits, Emma, Sarah Chun, Jake Morrison, Tyler Brooks, Marcus Williams, David Park, and Alex Rivera, stood shivering in the pre-dawn darkness as instructors circled them like sharks. The famous brass bell that would end. Their suffering sat on a post 20 yards away, gleaming under the floodlights. Your first evolution begins now, Kane continued. You have 30 seconds to get into full gear and report to the surf zone. Anyone not ready gets an automatic time penalty that the entire class will pay for. The scramble for gear was pandemonium. Emma moved with mechanical efficiency, her muscle memory taking over as she donned her equipment, while others fumbled. With straps and buckles in the smoky darkness, she was dressed and ready with 10 seconds to spare. The surf zone at 0200 hours was a nightmare of crashing waves and biting wind. The instructors had set up stadium lights that turned the beach into a surreal theater of suffering. The first evolution was log PT, using the massive telephone poles as weights for an hour of non-stop exercises. Log up! Instructor Harrison commanded, and the 7 recruits struggled to hoist the 200-pound log above their heads. Emma's arms screamed in protest, but she locked her elbows and held position. Log down, log up, log down, push-ups on the log. Sit-ups. Log up. The commands came in rapid succession, designed to exhaust the recruits before the real training even began. Around the 15-minute mark, Marcus Williams's arms gave out. The log crashed down, nearly crushing David Park's foot. Williams, Kane's voice could have shattered glass. Your weakness just endangered your teammate, everyone in the surf. Now, The entire class ran into the freezing Pacific, linking arms, as waves crashed over their heads. This was surf torture, the punishment for any individual failure that would be repeated countless times throughout. Hell Week. After 10 minutes in the surf, they were ordered back to the log. Emma's lips were blue, her entire body shaking uncontrollably, but she took her position without complaint. What the instructors didn't notice was how quickly she adapted her grip, finding ways to use her smaller hands to better advantage on the wet wood. It was during the second hour of log PT that Emma first demonstrated something that made Chief Kane take notice. Williams had cramped up again, causing the log to tilt dangerously towards Sarah Chen. Without hesitation, Emma shifted her position and took Williams's share of the weight, her small frame somehow finding the leverage to stabilize the entire log. "Collins," Kane barked, "what are you doing?" "Supporting my teammate, Instructor Kane." Kane studied her for a long moment. "Outstanding. Williams, you just learned what teamwork looks like from someone half your size." But Emma's assistance came at a cost. Taking Williams's weight meant she was now carrying far more than her proportional share, and the strain was beginning to show. Her form remained perfect, but Kane could see the tremor in her arms, the barely controlled shake that indicated she was operating on pure willpower. The sun was rising when they finally moved to the next evolution, boat races in the surf. Each two-person crew had to paddle an inflatable boat through the breakers, around a buoy positioned 200 yards offshore, and back to the beach. The losing crew would face additional punishment. Emma was paired with Alex Rivera, a former college swimmer, whose technique was flawless, but whose mental toughness was questionable. As they dragged their boat into the surf, Emma noticed Rivera's hands shaking, not from cold, but from fear. "Rivera," Emma said quietly as they positioned the boat for launch, "stay with me. We can do this." The race was brutal. Massive waves crashed over the boats, filling them with water and threatening to flip them entirely. Most crews fought against the waves, using brute force to power through the surf. But Emma took a different approach. "Stop paddling," she told Rivera as a massive wave bore down on them. "What? Are you crazy? Trust me." Instead of fighting the wave, Emma angled their boat to ride with it, using the water's power to propel them forward. When the wave passed, she resumed paddling with renewed intensity. It was a technique that required perfect timing and an understanding of ocean dynamics that most recreational sailors never developed. They finished second, behind only Morrison and Brooks, who had relied on pure muscle power to force their way through the surf. But Emma's technique had been far more efficient, conserving energy that would be crucial as Hell Week progressed. Lieutenant Commander Harrison watched the race results with growing frustration. Emma Collins was supposed to be the weak link, the recruit who would break under pressure and prove his point about women in special operations. Instead, she was consistently performing above expectations, finding ways to succeed that had nothing to do with raw physical strength. After the boat races came the obstacle course, but this time, recruits had to complete it while carrying a 50-pound pack and wearing full gear. The course included rope climbs, wall scaling, tire runs, and a particularly challenging monkey bar traverse over a pit filled with cold, muddy water. Emma approached each obstacle methodically, studying the challenge before attempting it. While other recruits attacked obstacles with brute force, often failing and having to repeat them, Emma found efficient solutions that conserved energy. At the rope climb, she used a technique that wrapped the rope around her leg for support, allowing her arms to rest between upward movements. On the wall scaling exercise, she found handholds that others missed, plotting a path that minimized the distance she had to climb. But it was at the monkey bars that Emma truly distinguished herself. The bars were set far enough apart that most recruits had to jump between them, a technique that required significant upper body strength. Emma was too short for the jumping technique, so she developed an alternative approach, Using a swinging motion, she built momentum that carried her between bars with minimal energy expenditure. Her technique was so efficient that she actually completed the traverse faster than Morrison, despite being significantly smaller. "How did you do that?" Sarah Chun asked as they regrouped after the obstacle course. Emma was toweling mud off her hands. Her expression focused on the next challenge. Physics. Use what you have. Work around what you don't. It was a simple answer, but it revealed something important about Emma's mindset. While other recruits focused on their limitations, she consistently found ways to turn constraints into advantages. The second night of Hell Week brought the dreaded around-the-world exercise, a continuous movement from station to station around the entire base, carrying boats, logs, and equipment, while performing various tasks at each stop. The exercise was designed to continue for 8 hours without rest. By hour 4, Marcus Williams rang the bell. He simply couldn't continue, his body shutting down from exhaustion and hypothermia. The class was now down to 6 recruits. By hour 6, David Park followed. He'd been struggling with shoulder pain since the LOD PT, and the continuous carrying finally broke him. 5 recruits remained. Emma felt the absence of each departed teammate like a physical blow. Not because it made the remaining exercises harder, but because she understood something the instructors were trying to teach, that in real operations, when team members were lost, the mission still had to continue. As dawn broke on the second day of Hell Week, the 5 survivors stood in formation, their eyes hollow with exhaustion, their bodies pushed far beyond normal limits. Chief Kane surveyed them with something approaching respect. "You 5 have just completed 36 hours of continuous training," Kane announced. "You've learned what it feels like to operate when your body wants to quit. Now we find out what happens when we take away your sleep entirely." Emma looked down the line at her remaining teammates. Sarah Chun stood with military bearing despite her obvious exhaustion. Morrison had lost some of his earlier arrogance, replaced by grim determination. Brooks and Rivera looked like walking zombies, operating on pure willpower, but it was Morrison who surprised her. As they prepared for the next evolution, he approached her with an expression she'd never seen from him before. "Collins," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. You've earned your place here." Emma met his eyes, seeing genuine respect where there had once been contempt. "We're not done yet, Morrison." "No," he agreed, "we're not. But when we are, I want you on my team." What Morrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Emma Collins had already been through something far worse than Hell Week, in places where the training never ended, where failure meant death, and where she'd learned that sometimes the smallest person in the room was the one everyone else depended on to get them home alive. But that revelation was still days away. First, they had to survive the remaining 96 hours of the most challenging training the U.S. military had to offer, while Emma Collins and the remaining 4 recruits endured the brutal middle phase of Hell Week. 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., a different kind of investigation was taking place. Master Chief Petty Officer Thomas Bradley sat in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, staring at a computer screen that displayed what should have been a routine personnel file. Emma Collins's file was anything but routine. Bradley had been tasked with conducting standard security clearance updates for all SEAL candidates, a mundane administrative duty that usually involved verifying college transcripts and employment histories. But Collins's file had anomalies that made his 25 years of intelligence experience tingle with warning signals. Her employment history showed 3 years, working as a fitness instructor at a civilian gym in Denver. The gym confirmed her employment, her supervisors gave glowing reviews, and her tax records matched perfectly. It was the kind of clean, unremarkable background that should have satisfied any security investigation, except for the gaps. Bradley pulled up travel records and found something interesting. Emma Collins had taken vacation time from her gym job on 6 separate occasions over the past 2 years. Each vacation lasted exactly 2 weeks. Each time, she'd filed the paperwork well in advance, then granted the time off and returned to work punctually, but there were no corresponding travel records. No airline tickets, no hotel reservations, no credit card transactions outside of Denver during those periods. For 6 separate 2-week periods, Emma Collins had simply vanished from the digital footprint that defined modern life. Bradley leaned back in his chair, his instincts sharpened by decades of uncovering secrets people wanted to keep buried. In his experience, people who knew how to disappear completely had learned that skill somewhere. And the places that taught that level of operational security weren't civilian fitness centers. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Richardson here. Tom, it's Bradley at NSW Command. I need a favor." CIA Operations Officer Jennifer Richardson had worked with Bradley on enough joint operations to trust his judgment. "What do you need?" "Run a background check on someone for me, full spectrum. Emma Collins, 24 years old, currently in SEAL training at Coronado." "What's got your attention?" Bradley stared at the gaps in Collins's travel records. "Ghost patterns. Professional-level operational security from someone who's supposed to be a civilian. I'll see what I can find. Give me 48 hours. But Richardson's investigation would reveal something far more significant than either of them expected. Meanwhile, on the beaches of Coronado, Hell Week had entered its most brutal phase. 72 hours of continuous training had pushed the 5 remaining recruits beyond normal human endurance. They moved like zombies, their decision-making compromised by extreme sleep deprivation, their bodies operating on nothing but willpower and muscle memory. The current evolution was rock portage, a nightmarish exercise where boat crews had to navigate through jagged rocks and heavy surf while carrying wounded casualties represented by 180-pound dummies. The exercise simulated real-world special operations missions, where extraction points were often in hostile, dangerous terrain. Emma found herself paired with Tyler Brooks, whose earlier antagonism had been replaced by grim determination to survive. They approached the rocky coastline as waves crashed violently against the jagged stones, sending spray 30 feet into the air. "Collins," Brooks said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and salt water, "I can't feel my hands anymore." Emma looked at her partner. Brooks was a big man, a former Marine who had seemed invincible during the early weeks of training. Now he was barely functional, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. The dummy they were carrying, representing a wounded teammate, felt heavier with each step. "Brooks, listen to me," Emma said, her voice cutting through the roar of the surf. "We're going to get through this rock formation. But I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" Brooks nodded, too exhausted to argue. What happened next would be talked about for years among SEAL instructors. Instead of trying to power through the rocks like the other boat crews, Emma began reading the wave patterns, timing their movement to work with the ocean rather than against it. She guided Brooks through a path that avoided the most dangerous collision points, using smaller waves to boost their progress and finding handholds that others missed. But it was when Brooks stumbled and nearly dropped their casualty into the churning water that Emma demonstrated something that made Chief Kane stop watching the other crews entirely. In one fluid motion, Emma caught the falling dummy, redistributed its weight across her shoulders, and continued navigating through the fog rocks while supporting both the 180-pound casualty and her faltering partner. For someone who weighed 125 pounds, the physics should have been impossible, yet she made it look effortless, her movements economical and precise, as if she'd done this exact maneuver countless times before in situations where the casualty wasn't a training dummy. Kane spoke into his radio headset. "Command, this is Kane. I need you to take another look at Collins's background file. Something doesn't add up." What kind of something? Came the reply from the command post. Kane watched Emma guide Brooks to safety, her technique flawless despite operating on no sleep for 3 straight days. The kind of something that suggests she's done this before, for real. That evening, as the recruits attempted to grab 30 minutes of sleep before the next evolution, Kane made a phone call to the administrative office responsible for recruit files. "This is Chief Kane at NSW Command. I need you to double-check the background. Verification on recruit Emma Collins. Is there a problem with her security clearance?" Kane stared out at the dark ocean where, hours earlier, he'd watched a 125-pound woman perform a casualty extraction that most seasoned SEALs would have found challenging. Maybe we missed something important. The administrative officer pulled up Collins's file on his computer. "Everything looks standard here, Chief. Civilian background, fitness instructor, clean record. What specifically are you looking for?" "Training. Professional training. The kind that teaches someone to navigate dangerous terrain while carrying casualties." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Chief, according to her file, her only formal training is a civilian fitness certification. But ... But what? I'm seeing a note here that her file was flagged by Master Chief Bradley in Washington. Something about irregular travel patterns." Kane felt his instincts sharpen. What kind of irregular patterns? "Gaps. Extended periods where she disappeared from normal record keeping. Bradley's requesting a full intelligence background check." Kane hung up the phone and walked back toward the barracks where 5 exhausted recruits were trying to steal a few minutes of rest before the next round of torture began. He looked through the window at Emma Collins, who was sitting on the edge of her bunk, writing in that small leather journal she carried everywhere. What was she writing? And why did someone who was supposedly a civilian fitness instructor write with the focused intensity of someone filing operational reports? In Washington, CIA Officer Richardson had just finished her preliminary investigation into Emma Collins's background. What she'd found made her reach for her secure phone immediately. "Bradley, we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Richardson stared at the classified document on her screen, cross-referencing it with Emma Collins's photograph from her SEAL training file. "The kind where Emma Collins isn't who she says she is." "Explain." "I ran her biometrics through our classified databases. Emma Collins died 4 years ago in a car accident in Oregon. The woman currently in SEAL training has been using a deceased person's identity." Bradley felt his blood run cold. "Then who the hell is she?" "That's what's really interesting. Her biometrics match someone from our files, but the record is so heavily classified I need special authorization just to access the name." "How heavily classified?" Richardson's voice was grim. "The kind of classification reserved for people who officially don't exist." As day 4 of Hell Week dawned, only 3 recruits remained standing. Alex Rivera had rung the bell during the night after collapsing during a hypothermia-inducing surf exercise. Sarah Chun had been medically withdrawn after sustaining a shoulder injury during the rock portage evolution. Emma, Morrison, and Brooks stood in formation as Chief Kane announced the final phase of Hell Week. Despite 4 days of brutal punishment, Emma appeared to be in better condition than her 2 remaining teammates. While Morrison and Brooks swayed with exhaustion, Emma stood straight, her eyes alert and focused. "Your final evolution," Kane announced, "is a 20-mile beach run, followed by a tactical swim to a designated point offshore. You'll navigate using only compass and natural landmarks. Mission success requires all 3 of you to complete the course together." Kane paused, studying the 3 survivors. "This exercise simulates an extraction scenario, where team cohesion is the difference between mission success and mission failure." What Kane didn't tell them was that this final evolution had been modified specifically to test Emma Collins. Based on his observations over the past 4 days, He suspected she had capabilities that went far beyond civilian fitness training. The course had been designed to reveal exactly what those capabilities were. As the three recruits began their final run along the beach, Kane spoke into his radio. "Command, initiate surveillance protocol on Collins. I want everything recorded." Because Chief Kane had spent enough time around special operations personnel to recognize something the others had missed. Emma Collins moved like someone who had been trained to survive in hostile environments. She navigated like someone who had done it operationally. And most importantly, she led like someone who had been responsible for bringing people home alive. The question was, where had she learned those skills? And why was someone with that level of training pretending to be a civilian recruit? The answers to those questions would change everything for Emma, for SEAL training, and for a classified operation that had supposedly ended years ago in a place that didn't officially exist. The 20-mile beach run should have been the breaking point for any normal human being after 4 days of Hell Week. Emma, Morrison, and Brooks had been pushed beyond the limits of physical and mental endurance, their bodies running on nothing but willpower and whatever reserves they could find in the deepest parts of their determination. But as they reached the 10-mile mark, something extraordinary happened. While Morrison and Brooks were clearly struggling, their pace slowing with each step, Emma seemed to be finding a second wind. Her breathing remained controlled, her stride steady, her eyes constantly scanning their route, as if she was reading terrain features that her companions couldn't see. "Collins," Morrison gasped as they approached a particularly challenging section of beach where rocks created a natural obstacle course. "How are you still moving like that?" Emma glanced at her teammate, noting the way he favored his left leg. The slight tremor in his hands that indicated extreme fatigue. "Pacing, Morrison. Save energy for when you need it most." But it was more than pacing. Emma was running like someone who had covered similar distances under combat conditions, where the ability to maintain mobility could mean the difference between extraction and capture. Her situational awareness never flagged, her head on a constant swivel, checking their 6 o'clock and scanning for potential threats that existed only in training scenarios. Chief Kane followed their progress from a command vehicle, studying Emma's movement patterns through binoculars. Every instinct he developed over 2 decades of special operations was telling him that Emma Collins had done this before. Not training versions, but the real thing. "Command," Kane spoke into his radio. "Collins is maintaining combat level. Alertness during extreme fatigue. This isn't exhaustion management you learn in civilian fitness programs." The response crackled back immediately. "Kane, we just received word from Washington. Collins's identity has some serious irregularities. Continue surveillance and document everything." When the 3 survivors reached the ocean entry point for their tactical swim, they were faced with conditions that would have challenged fresh, rested seals. The Pacific was churning with 6-foot swells. The water temperature was 52 degrees. And their target, a buoy positioned 2 miles offshore, was barely visible through the morning haze. The exercise required them to swim to the buoy, retrieve a waterproof packet containing their next orders, and return to shore as a team. Anyone who failed to complete the swim would automatically fail Hell Week, regardless of their performance in previous evolutions. Emma studied the water conditions with the intense focus of someone making a tactical assessment. She noted the wind direction, the wave patterns, the way the current was running parallel to the shore. While Morrison and Brooks simply prepared to power through the swim using brute force, Emma was calculating angles and planning a route that would work with the ocean rather than against it. "Listen to me," Emma said as they prepared to enter the water. "We're going to swim at a 30-degree angle to our target for the first half-mile, then adjust. The current will carry us if we work with it." Brooks, shivering in his wetsuit, looked skeptical. "That's going to add distance, Collins. It'll save energy. Trust me, what happened during that swim would be analyzed by SEAL instructors for years afterward." Emma didn't just lead her team to the buoy, she guided them through a masterclass in open water navigation under adverse conditions. Her route selection was flawless, her timing perfect, her understanding of ocean dynamics far beyond what any civilian should possess. But it was her behavior during the return swim that truly caught Chief Kane's attention. When Brooks began to struggle with hypothermia about a mile from shore, Emma immediately shifted into what could only be described as combat medic mode. She assessed Brooks's condition with clinical precision, recognizing the early signs of severe hypothermia. Instead of simply encouraging him to push through, she implemented a buddy system, swimming technique that allowed her to monitor his condition while helping him maintain body heat through controlled physical contact. "Brooks, stay with me," Emma commanded, her voice carrying an authority that transcended rank or training hierarchy. "Match my breathing. Focus on my voice. We're getting you to shore." The technique she used wasn't something taught in civilian lifeguard courses. It was advanced combat swimming protocol, designed for situations where team members needed to be extracted under hostile conditions while maintaining operational effectiveness. Chief Kane spoke into his radio with growing urgency. "Command, Collins. Just demonstrated advanced combat medical and extraction techniques. I repeat, she has professional-level training that doesn't appear anywhere in her file." At the Pentagon, CIA Officer Richardson finally received the authorization she needed to access Emma Collins's true identity. What appeared on her screen made her immediately understand why the file had been so heavily classified. The woman currently completing Hell Week wasn't Emma Collins at all. She was Lieutenant Sarah Catherine Mitchell, a former CIA paramilitary operations officer who had been declared killed in action during a classified mission in Afghanistan 3 years earlier. Richardson's hands trembled as she read through Mitchell's operational history: deep cover infiltration missions, counterterrorism operations in multiple theaters, advanced tactical training that included combat medicine, demolitions, and survival techniques that went far beyond anything taught in conventional military schools. Lieutenant Mitchell had been part of a joint CIA Special Operations Command unit that officially didn't exist. They operated in places that weren't on any map, conducting missions that would never appear in any public record. She had been responsible for operations that saved hundreds of lives and prevented terrorist attacks that the American public would never know had been planned. According to the file, Lieutenant Mitchell had been killed during a mission gone wrong in the mountains of Afghanistan. Her body had never been recovered. Her family had been told she died in a training accident. The unit she belonged to had been disbanded, its members reassigned or discharged with their service records sanitized. But Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell wasn't dead. She was currently completing the most challenging military training in the world under an assumed identity. For reasons that weren't yet clear, Richardson reached for her secure phone. This was bigger than a simple case of identity fraud. This was a highly trained intelligence operative with 3 years of missing time, operating under deep cover for unknown purposes. As Emma, Morrison, and Brooks finally reached the shore, completing their Hell Week ordeal, Chief Kane was waiting with a full security detail. The 3 exhausted recruits staggered out of the surf, their bodies pushed beyond all reasonable limits, their minds foggy with exhaustion. "Congratulations," Kane announced, his voice carrying across the beach. "You 3 have successfully completed Hell Week. You are now qualified to continue with advanced SEAL training." Morrison and Brooks collapsed onto the sand, their relief overwhelming. They had done it. They had survived the most brutal training the military had to offer, but Emma remained standing, her instincts sharpened by something in Kane's tone. She noticed the security personnel positioned around the beach, the way Kane's hand rested near his sidearm, the subtle tension that indicated this wasn't a normal graduation ceremony. "Collins," Kane said, his voice carefully neutral, "I need you to come with me." Emma's mind raced through possibilities. Had they discovered her identity? Had someone connected her to her previous life? Or was this simply part of the training? Another test designed to break candidates who thought they had already proven themselves. She looked at Morrison and Brooks, both too exhausted to understand what was happening. Whatever came next, she would face it alone. "Yes, Chief Kane," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. As she followed Kane toward the waiting vehicles, Emma's hand unconsciously moved toward the small leather journal in her pocket. Inside that journal were the real reasons she had come to SEAL training. Not for glory or recognition, but because she had unfinished business. People who needed to be found. A mission that had never been completed. For 3 years the world had believed that Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was dead. But Sarah Mitchell had simply been waiting for the right opportunity to resurface. And SEAL training had provided the perfect cover for someone who needed to disappear into the military's most elite units. The question now was whether Chief Kane and his superiors would understand why she had done it, or whether her carefully constructed new identity was about to crumble, taking with it her only chance to complete the mission that had supposedly killed her 3 years ago. As the vehicles drove away from the beach, leaving Morrison and Brooks to celebrate their Hell Week victory, Emma prepared for a different kind of battle. One where the enemy wasn't exhaustion or physical challenges, but the truth about who she really was, and why someone who was supposed to be dead had chosen to return from the grave. The easy part, surviving Hell Week, was over. Now came the real test. The secure facility at Naval Special Warfare Command had rooms designed for conversations that never officially happened. Emma found herself in one of those rooms, windowless, soundproof, with walls that seemed to absorb both light and hope. She sat across from a conference table where 3 people waited: Chief Kane, CIA Officer Richardson, and a man in civilian clothes who hadn't bothered to introduce himself. Emma, or rather, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, had been given time to shower and change into a standard Navy uniform, but the exhaustion from Hell Week still weighed on her like a physical burden. Her hands, steady enough to guide teammates through hypothermic crisis just hours earlier, now trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass placed in front of her. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Richardson began, her voice professional but not unkind. "Yes, we know who you are. The question is why someone who was declared killed in action 3 years ago is sitting in a SEAL training facility using the identity of a dead civilian." Sarah, she had to think of herself as Sarah now, not Emma, met Richardson's gaze steadily. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." The unnamed civilian pushed a folder across the table. Inside were photographs that made Sarah's carefully controlled expression falter. Images from her CIA days, mission briefings in Afghanistan, tactical operations in Syria, surveillance photos from missions that had never been acknowledged by any government. "Operation Blackwater," the civilian said, his voice carrying the weight of classified knowledge. "Joint CIA-SOCOM mission targeting high-value terrorist assets in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Your team infiltrated a Taliban stronghold to extract captured American contractors." Sarah stared at the photographs, memories flooding back with painful clarity. The mission that was supposed to be her last before transitioning to a desk job. The operation that had gone catastrophically wrong when their extraction helicopter was shot down, leaving 6 operatives stranded in hostile territory with no backup plan. The official report states that all 6 team members were killed when their position was overrun, Richardson continued. "But you survived, didn't you? You were the only one who made it out." Chief Kane leaned forward, his expression intense. "Collins Mitchell, whatever your name is, I've been training SEALs for 15 years. I know operational experience when I see it. That swim today, the way you handled Brooks's hypothermia, the tactical awareness you've shown throughout training, that's not something you learn in civilian life." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of 3 years of carefully constructed lies beginning to crumble. When she opened them again, her voice carried a different quality, the authority of someone who had commanded life-and-death operations in places where backup was measured in days, not minutes. "You want to know why I'm here?" Sarah's voice was steady now, the exhausted recruit persona dropping away to reveal the intelligence officer underneath. "Because 5 of my teammates are still missing, and the government declared them dead to close an embarrassing chapter in an unauthorized operation." The silence in the room was absolute as Sarah began to speak. 3 years of suppressed truth, poured out in a steady, controlled narrative that painted a picture of government bureaucracy sacrificing soldiers to protect political careers. Operation Blackwater was off the books, Sarah explained. Joint Task Force, plausible deniability. No official oversight. We were sent to extract 3 American contractors who had been captured while surveying mining sites for rare earth elements. The intelligence was wrong. It wasn't a Taliban camp, it was a staging area for a major offensive. She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the table that matched the nervous habits Emma Collins had displayed during training. But now those patterns made sense. They were tactical hand signals, muscle memory from operations where silent communication meant survival. When our helicopter was hit, we had 2 choices: abort and let the contractors die, or continue the mission on foot with no extraction plan. We voted. Unanimous decision to continue. Richardson made notes on a legal pad, her expression carefully neutral. The after-action report indicates your team was overrun at the primary objective. The after-action report is fiction, Sarah replied flatly. We completed the primary mission. Extracted all 3 contractors. But during exfiltration, we were ambushed. I was separated from my team during the firefight. When I reached the rally point, they were gone. Chief Kane studied Sarah's face, reading the pain that she'd carried for 3 years. You think they were captured? I know they were captured. I spent 6 weeks infiltrating Taliban networks trying to find them. By the time I made contact with friendly forces, the official story had already been written. 6 KIA, mission failure, case closed. The unnamed civilian Sarah was beginning to suspect he was NSA, or possibly Defense Intelligence. Leaned back in his chair. So you decided to come back from the dead and do what exactly? Mount a 1-person rescue mission? Sarah's laugh was bitter. I tried official channels first. Spent 18 months filing reports, requesting investigations, demanding that someone look for my team. Know what I was told? That I was suffering from survivor's guilt and PTSD. That I needed to accept the official story and move on with my life. She gestured toward the walls around them. SEAL training was my way back into the system. Create a new identity, prove my capabilities, get assigned to a team that operates in Central Asia, then find my people and bring them home. Richardson exchanged glances with her colleagues. This wasn't a simple case of identity fraud or desertion. This was a decorated intelligence officer who had been abandoned by her own government and had chosen to take extraordinary measures to complete a mission that should never have been forgotten. Lieutenant Mitchell, Richardson said carefully, assuming your story is accurate, what you've done constitutes multiple felonies. Identity theft, fraud, falsifying government documents, and what my government did constitutes abandoning American service members in hostile territory. Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been present during any of her interactions as Emma Collins. 5 of the best operators I've ever worked with are either dead or being held prisoner, and no one has looked for them because it's politically inconvenient. Chief Kane had remained silent during most of the exchange, but now he spoke with the authority of someone who had sent young men and women into harm's way. Mitchell, I need to ask you a direct question. During Hell Week, during all of training, have you been evaluating our methods for your own purposes? Are you using SEAL training as some kind of advanced preparation for a private mission? Sarah met his gaze directly. Chief Kane, I came here to become a better operator so I could find my teammates. But what I learned is that SEAL training produces the kind of warriors who don't leave people behind. If I had been a ECAL during Operation Blackwater, this conversation wouldn't be happening because my team would never have been abandoned in the first place. The comment hit Kane harder than Sarah had intended. The SEAL ethos, never leave a fallen comrade, was more than a motto. It was a sacred trust that defined everything they did. So what's your plan now? The civilian asked. Finish SEAL training and request deployment to Afghanistan. Hope you get assigned to a mission that takes you close enough to your old operational area to conduct unauthorized searches. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. My plan now is to tell you everything I know about where my team was taken, everything I learned during my 6 weeks of unauthorized investigation, and hope that someone in this room has enough integrity to finish what we started. She opened her small leather journal, the one that everyone had assumed contained personal thoughts, and placed it on the table. This contains 3 years of intelligence gathering, names, locations, network connections, financial flows. Everything I've learned about the organization that captured my team. Richardson reached for the journal, but Sarah's hand closed over it first. Before I turn this over, Sarah said, I need your word that this won't disappear into some classified vault. These aren't just names on a page, they're my family. Rogers, Chun, Patterson, Williams, and Rodriguez. They trusted me to lead them home, and I failed. I won't fail them again. The room fell silent as the 3 officials processed what Sarah had revealed. This wasn't just about identity fraud or unauthorized training. This was about 5 missing American operatives, a botched mission that had been covered up for political reasons, and a decorated officer who had sacrificed everything to keep faith with her teammates. Chief Kane was the first to speak. Mitchell, assuming we can verify your story, what outcome are you hoping for here? Sarah's answer was immediate and uncompromising. I want a sanctioned mission to recover my teammates. I want the resources and support that should have been provided 3 years ago. And I want to complete SEAL training so I'm qualified to lead that mission myself. The unnamed civilian shook his head. That's not how the system works. You can't just demand military resources for personal vendettas. This isn't a personal vendetta, Sarah replied, her voice rising for the first time. This is completing a mission that was never officially terminated. Those 5 operators are still listed as Kia, but they're not dead. And as long as there's a chance they're alive, we have an obligation to find them. Richardson closed her notebook, her expression thoughtful. Lieutenant Mitchell, you've placed us in an impossible position. What you've done requires prosecution under military law. But what you've revealed suggests a mission that deserves investigation. She stood up, gathering her materials. I'm going to make some phone calls to people who have the authority to decide whether you're a criminal or a patriot. As the officials filed out, leaving Sarah alone in the windowless room, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the mountains of Afghanistan to the beaches of Coronado, every step had been aimed at this single goal: finding her lost teammates and bringing them home. The question now was whether the system that had abandoned them once would find the courage to admit its mistake and authorize the mission that should have happened 3 years ago. Outside the interrogation room, the future of both Sarah Mitchell and 5 missing American operators hung in the balance, waiting for decisions that would be made in offices far from the battlefield where good people had been left behind. The secure facility at Naval Special Warfare Command had rooms designed for conversations that never officially happened. Emma found herself in one of those rooms, windowless, soundproof, with walls that seemed to absorb both light and hope. She sat across from a conference table where 3 people waited: Chief Kane, CIA Officer Richardson, and a man in civilian clothes who hadn't bothered to introduce himself. Emma, or rather, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, had been given time to shower and change into a standard Navy uniform. But the exhaustion from Hell Week still weighed on her like a physical burden. Her hands, steady enough to guide teammates through hypothermic crisis just hours earlier, now trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass placed in front of her. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Richardson began, her voice professional but not unkind. "Yes, we know who you are. The question is why someone who was declared killed in action 3 years ago is sitting in a ACAL training facility using the identity of a dead civilian." Sarah, she had to think of herself as Sarah now, not Emma, met Richardson's gaze steadily. "I'm not sure what you're talking about." The unnamed civilian pushed a folder across the table. Inside were photographs that made Sarah's carefully controlled expression falter. Images from her CIA days, mission briefings in Afghanistan, tactical operations in Syria, surveillance photos from missions that had never been acknowledged by any government. "Operation Blackwater," the civilian said, his voice carrying the weight of classified knowledge. "Joint CIA-SOCOM mission targeting high-value terrorist assets in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Your team infiltrated a Taliban stronghold to extract captured American contractors." Sarah stared at the photographs, memories flooding back with painful clarity. The mission that was supposed to be her last before transitioning to a desk job. The operation that had gone catastrophically wrong when their extraction helicopter was shot down, leaving 6 operatives stranded in hostile territory with no backup plan. "The official report states that all 6 team members were killed when their position was overrun," Richardson continued. "But you survived, didn't you? You were the only one who made it out." Chief Kane leaned forward, his expression intense. "Collins Mitchell, whatever your name is, I've been training SEALs for 15 years. I know operational experience when I see it. That swim today, the way you handled Brooks's hypothermia, the tactical awareness you've shown throughout training, that's not something you learn in civilian life." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of 3 years of carefully constructed lies beginning to crumble. When she opened them again, her voice carried a different quality, the authority of someone who had commanded life-and-death operations in places where backup was measured in days, not minutes. "You want to know why I'm here?" Sarah's voice was steady now, the exhausted recruit persona dropping away to reveal the intelligence officer underneath. "Because 5 of my teammates are still missing, and the government declared them dead to close an embarrassing chapter in an unauthorized operation." The silence in the room was absolute as Sarah began to speak. 3 years of suppressed truth, poured out in a steady, controlled narrative that painted a picture of government bureaucracy sacrificing soldiers to protect political careers. "Operation Blackwater was off the books," Sarah explained. "Joint Task Force, plausible deniability. No official oversight. We were sent to extract 3 American contractors who had been captured while surveying mining sites for rare earth elements. The intelligence was wrong. It wasn't a Taliban camp, it was a staging area for a major offensive." She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the table that matched the nervous habits Emma Collins had displayed during training. But now those patterns made sense. They were tactical hand signals, muscle memory from operations where silent communication meant survival. "When our helicopter was hit, we had 2 choices: abort and let the contractors die, or continue the mission on foot with no extraction plan. We voted. Unanimous decision to continue." Richardson made notes on a legal pad, her expression carefully neutral. "The after-action report indicates your team was overrun at the primary objective." "The after-action report is fiction," Sarah replied flatly. "We completed the primary mission. Extracted all 3 contractors. But during exfiltration, we were ambushed. I was separated from my team during the firefight. When I reached the rally point, they were gone." Chief Kane studied Sarah's face, reading the pain that she'd carried for 3 years. "You think they were captured?" "I know they were captured. I spent 6 weeks infiltrating Taliban networks trying to find them. By the time I made contact with Friendly forces, the official story had already been written. 6 KIA, mission failure, case closed. The unnamed civilian Sarah was beginning to suspect he was NSA, or possibly Defense Intelligence. Leaned back in his chair. So you decided to come back from the dead, and do what, exactly? Mount a one-person rescue mission? Sarah's laugh was bitter. I tried official channels first. Spent 18 months filing reports, requesting investigations, demanding that someone look for my team. Know what I was told? That I was suffering from survivor's guilt and PTSD. That I needed to accept the official story and move on with my life. She gestured toward the walls around them. SEAL training was my way back into the system. Create a new identity, prove my capabilities, get assigned to a team that operates in Central Asia, then find my people and bring them home. Richardson exchanged glances with her colleagues. This wasn't a simple case of identity fraud or desertion. This was a decorated intelligence officer who had been abandoned by her own government and had chosen to take extraordinary measures to complete a mission that should never have been forgotten. Lieutenant Mitchell, Richardson said carefully, assuming your story is accurate, what you've done constitutes multiple felonies. Identity theft, fraud, falsifying government documents, and what my government did constitutes abandoning American service members in hostile territory. Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been present during any of her interactions as Emma Collins. 5 of the best operators I've ever worked with are either dead or being held prisoner, and no one has looked for them because it's politically inconvenient. Chief Kane had remained silent during most of the exchange, but now he spoke with the authority of someone who had sent young men and women into harm's way. Mitchell, I need to ask you a direct question. During Hell Week, during all of training, have you been evaluating our methods for your own purposes? Are you using SEAL training as some kind of advanced preparation for a private mission? Sarah met his gaze directly. Chief Kane, I came here to become a better operator so I could find my teammates. But what I learned is that SEAL training produces the kind of warriors who don't leave people behind. If I had been a SEAL during Operation Blackwater, this conversation wouldn't be happening because my team would never have been abandoned in the first place. The comment hit Kane harder than Sarah had intended. The SEAL ethos, never leave a fallen comrade, was more than a motto. It was a sacred trust that defined everything they did. So what's your plan now? The civilian asked. Finish SEAL training and request deployment to Afghanistan. Hope you get assigned to a mission that takes you close enough to your old operational area to conduct unauthorized searches. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. My plan now is to tell you everything I know about where my team was taken. Everything I learned during my 6 weeks of unauthorized investigation, and hope that someone in this room has enough integrity to finish what we started. She opened her small leather journal, the one that everyone had assumed contained personal thoughts, and placed it on the table. This contains 3 years of intelligence gathering. Names, locations, network connections, financial flows. Everything I've learned about the organization that captured my team. Richardson reached for the journal, but Sarah's hand closed over it first. Before I turn this over, Sarah said, I need your word that this won't disappear into some classified vault. These aren't just names on a page, they're my family. Rogers, Chun, Patterson, Williams, and Rodriguez. They trusted me to lead them home, and I failed. I won't fail them again. The room fell silent as the 3 officials processed what Sarah had revealed. This wasn't just about identity fraud or unauthorized training. This was about 5 missing American operatives, a botched mission that had been covered up for political reasons, and a decorated officer who had sacrificed everything to keep faith with her teammates. Chief Kane was the first to speak. Mitchell, assuming we can verify your story, what outcome are you hoping for here? Sarah's answer was immediate and uncompromising. I want a sanctioned mission to recover my teammates. I want the resources and support that should have been provided 3 years ago. And I want a complete SEAL training so I'm qualified to lead that mission myself." The unnamed civilian shook his head. "That's not how the system works. You can't just demand military resources for personal vendettas." "This isn't a personal vendetta," Sarah replied, her voice rising for the first time. "This is completing a mission that was never officially terminated. Those 5 operators are still listed as Kier, but they're not dead. And as long as there's a chance they're alive, we have an obligation to find them." Richardson closed her notebook, her expression thoughtful. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you've placed us in an impossible position. What you've done requires prosecution under military law. But what you've revealed suggests a mission that deserves investigation." She stood up, gathering her materials. "I'm going to make some phone calls to people who have the authority to decide whether you're a criminal or a patriot." As the officials filed out, leaving Sarah alone in the windowless room, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the mountains of Afghanistan to the beaches of Coronado, every step had been aimed at this single goal: finding her lost teammates and bringing them home. The question now was whether the system that had abandoned them once would find the courage to admit its mistake and authorize the mission that should have happened 3 years ago. Outside the interrogation room, the future of both Sarah Mitchell and 5 missing American operators hung in the balance, waiting for decisions that would be made in offices far from the battlefield, where good people had been left behind. Secretary of Defense Patricia Hawkins sat at the head of a mahogany conference table that had witnessed decisions affecting millions of lives. The secure briefing room deep within the Pentagon held an unusual assembly. CIA Director Michael Torres, SOCOM Commander General Patricia Hayes, NSA Deputy Director James Crawford, and a secure video link to the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. The file spread before them contained photographs, operational reports, and intelligence assessments that painted a picture of government failure and individual heroism that defied easy categorization. At the center of it all was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a woman who had officially died 3 years ago but had just completed the most grueling military training in the world under an assumed identity. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Secretary Hawkins began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had overseen military operations for 8 years. "We have a decorated CIA paramilitary officer who survived a classified mission that went wrong, spent 3 years gathering intelligence on her missing teammates, and infiltrated SEAL training to position herself for an unauthorized rescue mission." CIA Director Torres nodded grimly. "That's an accurate summary, Madam Secretary. The complexity is that her intelligence appears to be solid. Our analysts have spent the past 72 hours verifying the contents of her journal. The information is accurate, detailed, and suggests her missing teammates may indeed still be alive." General Hayes leaned forward, her expression intense. "From a military perspective, what Lieutenant Mitchell did was extraordinary. She identified a systemic failure in how we handle missing personnel from classified operations, and she took personal responsibility for correcting that failure. My SEAL instructors report that her performance during training was exceptional, not just physically, but in terms of leadership and tactical thinking." And ESA Deputy Director Crawford was less impressed. "What she did was commit multiple felonies in service of an unauthorized intelligence operation. If we don't prosecute her, we're essentially endorsing vigilante operations by intelligence personnel who disagree with official policy." Secretary Hawkins studied the photographs of Sarah's missing teammates. 5 faces stared back at her: young Americans who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions their country could offer, who had been abandoned when those missions became politically inconvenient. "General Hayes," Hawkins said, "in your professional opinion, what would be required to mount a recovery operation for these 5 personnel?" "Significant resources, Madam Secretary. We're talking about a region that's been effectively controlled by Taliban and other extremist groups for 3 years. Any rescue mission would require extensive planning, specialized personnel, and probably a larger footprint than we currently maintain in Afghanistan. Director Torres added, there's also the political consideration. Officially acknowledging that these operatives might be alive means admitting that Operation Blackwater was mismanaged from the beginning. That opens us up to congressional investigations, media scrutiny, and questions about how many other classified missions have been similarly mishandled. Crawford nodded in agreement. The precedent we set here matters. If we validate Mitchell's approach, we're telling every intelligence operative that they can take matters into their own hands if they disagree with official policy. Secretary Hawkins was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the intelligence assessments. What does Lieutenant Mitchell want, specifically? The voice from the video link belonged to Admiral Rebecca Martinez, Commander of Naval Special Warfare. She's requesting completion of SEAL training, assignment to a team with Central Asian operational capability, and authorization for a reconnaissance mission to determine the status of her former teammates. And if we refuse? She's indicated she provide full cooperation with any investigation, accept whatever legal consequences result from her actions, but will not stop pursuing the recovery of her teammates through whatever means available. To her, the room fell silent as each official weighed the implications. This wasn't just about one rogue operative or even 5 missing Americans. This was about the fundamental question of what obligations the government had to personnel who served in operations that officially didn't exist. Secretary Hawkins had seen similar cases during her tenure classified missions that went wrong. Personnel who disappeared into bureaucratic cracks, families who never learned the truth about what happened to their loved ones. The system was designed to protect national security interests, but sometimes that protection came at the cost of individual justice. Director Torres, Hawkins said, what's your assessment of Mitchell's psychological state? Is she mentally fit for continued operations? Our psychiatrists have conducted extensive interviews. She shows signs of survivor's guilt and PTSD, but she's psychologically stable and operationally competent. Her 3 years of intelligence gathering show impressive discipline and professional-level tradecraft. General Hayes added, her performance during SEAL training was exceptional. She demonstrated leadership under extreme stress, technical proficiency beyond what her supposed background should have provided, and most importantly, an absolute commitment to bringing her teammates home. Those are exactly the qualities we want in special operations personnel. Crawford remained skeptical. But can we trust someone who's already demonstrated willingness to operate outside official channels? How do we know she won't go rogue again if a future mission doesn't go according to plan? Admiral Martinez's voice crackled through the secure connection. With respect, sir, she didn't go rogue. She went underground to accomplish a mission that the system failed to complete. In my experience, that's exactly the kind of initiative and moral courage we should be encouraging, not punishing. Secretary Hawkins made her decision with the decisive authority that had carried her through decades of public service. Here's what we're going to do. General Hayes, I want you to develop a reconnaissance mission plan for the region where Mitchell believes her teammates are being held. Low profile, minimal footprint, focused on intelligence gathering rather than direct action. She looked around the table, her expression brooking no disagreement. Director Torres, Mitchell will be granted a provisional security clearance and assigned as a consultant to the mission planning team. Her knowledge of the operational area and the specific circumstances of her team's capture will be invaluable. Crawford started to object, but Hawkins continued. Admiral Martinez, Lieutenant Mitchell will be allowed to complete SEAL training under her current identity. Upon graduation, she'd be assigned to the reconnaissance mission as a subject matter expert, not as team leader. The secretary paused, letting the weight of her decision settle. The mission will have 2 objectives: determine the status of the 5 missing operatives, and if they're confirmed alive, develop a recovery plan. This is not authorization for immediate rescue operations. This is intelligence gathering with the option for future action based on what we discover. General Hayes nodded approvingly. Understood, Madam Secretary. I'll begin mission planning immediately. There are conditions, Hawkins continued. Mitchell will be under constant evaluation throughout training and mission planning. Any indication that she's operating outside official parameters will result in immediate mission termination and legal proceedings. She gets one chance to prove that her unauthorized actions were justified. Director Torres looked thoughtful. What about the identity fraud charges? We can't simply ignore the fact that she's been operating under false credentials for 3 years. The charges will be held in abeyance pending completion of the reconnaissance mission. If the mission succeeds and provides actionable intelligence on the missing operatives, the charges will be dropped in the interest of national security. If the mission fails or if Mitchell proves unreliable, she faced the full legal consequences of her actions. Crawford remained unconvinced. Madam Secretary, this sets a dangerous precedent. We're essentially rewarding someone for taking unauthorized action. Hawkins fixed him with a steady gaze. No, Mr. Crawford, we're acknowledging that sometimes the system fails, and when it does, we should be grateful that people like Lieutenant Mitchell are willing to risk everything to uphold the values we claim to represent. 3 days later, Sarah Mitchell, still officially known as Emma Collins to her fellow recruits, stood in formation at Naval Special Warfare Command. Morrison and Brooks flanked her, the 3 survivors of Hell Week about to begin the next phase of their training journey. Chief Kane approached the formation, his expression unreadable. To the other recruits, this was simply the continuation of their SEAL training. They had no idea that the woman they'd come to respect as a teammate was actually a decorated intelligence officer, whose very presence represented a fundamental challenge to how the military handled its most classified operations. Collins, Kane said, his voice carrying across the training compound. Step forward. Sarah moved to the position of attention in front of Kane, her bearing reflecting both the exhaustion of recent trials and the quiet confidence that had carried her through 3 years of careful planning. Recruit Collins, you've demonstrated exceptional performance during the initial phases of SEAL training. You're being assigned to an advanced training track that will prepare you for specialized operations. Kane's words were carefully chosen, revealing nothing about the true nature of her new assignment. Yes, Chief Kane, Sarah replied, her voice steady. What Kane didn't say, what couldn't be said in front of the other recruits, was that Sarah's new training would be unlike anything in the standard SEAL curriculum. She would be working with mission planners, intelligence analysts, and regional specialists to develop operational approaches for one of the most challenging rescue missions the military had ever contemplated. Morrison stepped forward slightly. Chief Kane, request permission to speak. Kane nodded. Chief Kane, Collins, Emma, she carried us through Hell Week. If she's getting advanced training, I'd like to volunteer for whatever program she's entering. Brooks nodded in agreement. She's the best operator I've served with, Chief Kane. Whatever mission she's preparing for, she shouldn't go alone. Kane studied the 2 young men, seeing in their faces the loyalty and brotherhood that defined special operations teams. Your loyalty to your teammate is noted, recruits. Continue with standard training progression. If your skills and dedication match Collins's performance, you may have opportunities for specialized assignments in the future. As the formation dismissed, Sarah caught Morrison's eye. For a brief moment, she saw in his expression the same commitment to bringing teammates home that had driven her own unauthorized mission. It gave her hope that when the time came, she wouldn't have to face the mission alone. That evening, in a secure conference room far from the training barracks, Sarah sat across from a team of intelligence analysts, mission planners, and regional experts. Maps of Afghanistan covered the walls. Satellite imagery showed terrain that had haunted her dreams for 3 years, and intelligence reports painted a picture of a region where American personnel had simply vanished. "Lieutenant Mitchell," said Colonel James Parker, the mission planning officer assigned to lead the reconnaissance development, "we've reviewed your intelligence package. Your analysis of Taliban movement patterns and detention facility locations is impressive, but 3 years is a long time in that region. We need to validate your information before we can develop operational plans." Sarah nodded, understanding the military's need for verified intelligence. "Colonel Parker, I've maintained contact with sources in the region through intermediaries. The intelligence is current as of 6 weeks ago." She opened her leather journal to a section marked with coordinates and dates. "My teammates were initially held at a compound near Gardez. Intelligence suggests they were moved to a more secure facility in the Spin-Gar Mountains approximately 18 months ago. I have detailed information on guard patterns, local leadership, and potential access routes." Dr. Emily Richardson, a regional expert from the Defense Intelligence Agency, studied the maps with professional interest. "Mitchell, your source network is impressive. How did you maintain operational security while gathering this intelligence?" "Carefully," Sarah replied. "I used a combination of technical collection, human intelligence assets, and financial tracking to build a comprehensive picture. The organization holding my teammates operates more like a criminal network than a traditional terrorist group. They're motivated by profit as much as ideology." Colonel Parker made notes on his planning documents. "If we proceed with a reconnaissance mission, what would you recommend as the primary approach?" Sarah had been preparing for this question for 3 years. "Small team insertion via helicopter. Establish an observation post with clear sight lines to the detention facility. Conduct surveillance to confirm personnel presence and gather intelligence on security measures. Duration, 72 hours maximum to minimize risk of detection. And if your teammates are confirmed present at the facility." Sarah's expression hardened with determination. "Then we plan a rescue mission and bring them home." The room fell quiet as the implications settled. This wasn't just about intelligence gathering anymore. This was about 5 American operatives who had been written off by their own government, and one woman who refused to accept that abandonment was the price of political convenience. Colonel Parker closed his planning folder. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you understand that this reconnaissance mission is not authorization for rescue operations. Our mandate is strictly intelligence gathering." Sarah met his gaze directly. "I understand the official mandate, Colonel. But I also understand that sometimes official mandates don't account for what operators find when they get boots on the ground." It was a statement that would have gotten her in serious trouble during her CIA days. But now, sitting in a room with people who understood that real operations rarely went according to plan, it was simply an acknowledgement of operational reality. The planning would take weeks. The mission itself would be dangerous, complex, and potentially politically explosive. But for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Mitchell felt like she was no longer fighting the battle alone. Outside the secure conference room, the machinery of the world's most powerful military was slowly turning toward a mission that would either vindicate her unauthorized actions or end her career in disgrace. Either way, 5 missing Americans were about to have someone looking for them again. That night, alone in her barracks room, Sarah wrote in her journal for what might be the last time as Emma Collins. Tomorrow her official identity would be restored, her military records updated, and her mission would shift from covert preparation to authorized operation. She thought about Morrison and Brooks, who had offered to follow her into whatever danger lay ahead without knowing what they were volunteering for. She thought about her missing teammates, whose faces had motivated every decision she'd made for 3 years. And she thought about the price of loyalty, both the cost of maintaining it and the cost of abandoning it, The easy part, surviving SEAL training and proving her capabilities, was over. Now came the real test: whether the system that had failed her teammates once could find the courage and competence to bring them home. In her careful handwriting, Sarah wrote a final entry: Day 87, training complete. Mission authorized. 5 teammates still missing, but no longer forgotten. Tomorrow we begin bringing them home. She closed the journal and prepared for a few hours of sleep before beginning the most important mission of her life. Outside her window, the Pacific Ocean stretched toward a horizon that held both danger and hope in equal measure. The woman they had called hopeless was about to prove that sometimes hope was the most powerful weapon of all. The helicopter cut through the thin mountain air at 14,000 feet, its rotors beating a rhythm that Sarah Mitchell felt in her bones. Below them, the jagged peaks of the Spingar Mountains stretched endlessly, hiding secrets that had cost too many lives to uncover. Sarah, now operating under her real name and rank, checked her equipment one final time. The small reconnaissance team consisted of herself, 2 Delta Force operators, and a signals intelligence specialist. After months of planning, satellite surveillance, and careful intelligence gathering, they had finally pinpointed the location where her 5 teammates were being held. The compound sat in a valley, so remote that it didn't appear on most maps. Accessible only by helicopter or a 3-day trek through terrain that had claimed the lives of countless soldiers over the centuries. Intelligence indicated that the facility served as both a detention center and a logistics hub for a criminal network that had evolved far beyond simple terrorism. 2 minutes to LZ, announced Captain Derek Walsh, the team leader whose Special Forces background complemented Sarah's CIA experience perfectly. Remember, this is reconnaissance only. We confirm target presence, assess security measures, and extract. No heroics. Sarah nodded, though both she and Walsh understood that reconnaissance missions rarely went according to plan when American lives were at stake. Through her headset, she could hear the steady breathing of the other team members. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, a combat veteran with 3 deployments, and Staff Sergeant Jennifer Kim, whose technical skills would be crucial for intercepting communications from the compound. As the helicopter approached the landing zone, Sarah's mind flashed back to the last time she'd been in these mountains. The failed extraction, the desperate firefight, the moment when she'd been separated from her team and forced to watch helplessly as they disappeared into captivity. 3 years of guilt, determination, and careful planning had led to this moment. The helicopter touched down in a clearing barely large enough for its rotors, and the team moved out with practiced efficiency. Within 30 seconds, they were on the ground with full equipment loads, and the aircraft was disappearing back toward friendly territory. For the next 72 hours, they would be entirely on their own in some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. The team established their observation posts on a ridge overlooking the target compound, using advanced optics and electronic surveillance equipment to monitor activities below. What they discovered in the first 12 hours of surveillance exceeded their most optimistic expectations. "I've got positive identification on 3 of the targets," Sarah whispered into her radio, her voice barely audible even to the team members positioned just yards away. Through her high-powered scope, she could see figures moving in the compound's courtyard, familiar silhouettes that she recognized despite 3 years of captivity. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was clearly visible during the morning exercise period, his distinctive gait unchanged despite obvious weight loss. Sergeant Chun appeared briefly near what looked like a workshop area, and Corporal Williams was identifiable by the way he favored his left shoulder, an old injury from their days training together. "Can you confirm the other 2? Captain Walsh asked, studying his own scope. Sarah adjusted her position, scanning the compound methodically. Negative visual on Patterson or Rogers, but the compound layout suggests additional holding areas in the main building. Sergeant Kim had been monitoring electronic communications from the facility, and her findings painted a disturbing picture. "The chatter indicates this isn't just a detention facility," she reported. "They're using our people for something. Technical work, maybe engineering projects. These aren't traditional prisoners. They're being treated more like forced labor." The revelation changed everything. Sarah's teammates weren't just being held, they were being exploited for their military technical expertise, probably forced to work on projects that could enhance their captors' capabilities. The ethical implications made immediate action seem not just justified, but necessary. On the second day of surveillance, the situation became exponentially more complex. A convoy of vehicles arrived at the compound, carrying what appeared to be high-value prisoners from another location. Among them, Sarah spotted two figures that made her blood run cold. "Walsh, I need you to look at the new arrivals through scope position 3, Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Captain Walsh shifted his surveillance equipment and studied the convoy. After a moment, he lowered his scope with an expression of grim recognition. "Those are American uniforms, recent captures." The new prisoners were clearly military personnel, probably from a recent operation that had gone wrong. Their arrival meant the compound now held at least 7 American service members, making any rescue attempt significantly more complicated, while simultaneously making abandonment morally impossible. Staff. Sergeant Kim intercepted communications. That provided crucial intelligence. "They're planning to move the long-term prisoners within 48 hours, she reported. "New location is described as more permanent. I think our window for any action is closing fast." Sarah processed this information with the clinical efficiency of someone trained to make life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. A move to a more permanent location likely meant her teammates would disappear forever into a network of facilities that could take years to locate and infiltrate. "Walsh," Sarah said quietly, "we need to expand mission parameters." Captain Walsh understood the implications immediately. "Mitchell, our orders are reconnaissance only. We don't have authorization for direct action, and we don't have the manpower for a successful assault on a facility holding 7 prisoners." But Sarah had been preparing for this possibility for 3 years. What if we don't assault the facility? What if we intercept the transfer? Working through the night, the team developed a plan that walked the line between their official reconnaissance mission and the unauthorized rescue operation that circumstances seemed to demand. Instead of attacking the fortified compound, they would target the convoy during the prisoner transfer, when security would be lighter and the tactical situation more favorable. Sarah's intelligence gathering had identified the likely transfer route, a mountain road that offered only one practical path through the terrain. The road included several choke points where a small team could potentially stop a convoy and extract prisoners before enemy reinforcements could arrive. "This is still way outside our mission parameters," Walsh pointed out as they refined the plan. "If this goes wrong, we're looking at court-martial proceedings and international incidents." Sarah met his gaze directly. "Captain, I've been living with the consequences of abandoning my teammates for 3 years. If we walk away now and they disappear again, I'll never forgive myself. More importantly, neither will you." Sergeant Torres, who had been silent during most of the planning discussion, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, I've read your file. What you did to get here, the SEAL training, the identity fraud, all of it that took serious commitment. If you're willing to risk everything for these people, then they must be worth it." Staff Sergeant Kim nodded in agreement. "Besides, sir, we've got 2 fresh American prisoners in that convoy. Even if we can't justify rescuing people who've been held for 3 years, we can justify preventing new captures from being transferred to permanent detention." It was a rationalization, but it was also sound tactical reasoning. Walsh made his decision with the kind of moral courage that defines special operations leadership. "All right, he said. "We intercept the convoy. But we do this smart, and we do this clean. No unnecessary casualties, minimal engagement time, and immediate extraction to the backup LZ. Everyone clear?" The team spent the remaining hours of daylight conducting detailed reconnaissance of the transfer route, identifying optimal positions for the ambush, and coordinating with their extraction helicopter for an emergency pickup at a secondary location 30 miles from the compound. The convoy consisted of 3 vehicles: a lid truck with security personnel, a reinforced transport carrying the prisoners, and a trailing vehicle with additional guards. Intelligence suggested 12 enemy combatants total, armed but not expecting interference in terrain they considered secure. Sarah positioned herself with the long-range rifle, responsible for disabling the lead and trailing vehicles to trap the convoy in the kill zone. Walsh and Torres would assault the prison transport directly, while Kim provided overwatch and communication support. As the convoy approached the predetermined choke point, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came with operational focus. 3 years of planning, 6 months of official preparation, and 72 hours of intense surveillance had led to this moment. "Convoy in sight," she whispered into her radio. "Lead vehicle approaching target zone in 30 seconds. The ambush unfolded with precision that reflected months of training and years of experience. Sarah's first shot disabled the lead vehicle's engine, bringing it to an immediate stop. Her second shot took out the trailing vehicle's front tire, causing it to slide sideways and block the road. Walsh and Torres moved on the prison transport with coordinated efficiency, using flashbang grenades to disorient the guards before breaching the vehicle. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes, with minimal casualties and maximum shock effect, but it was what they found inside the transport that made the risk worthwhile. 7 American service members sat shackled in the back of the transport vehicle, their faces gaunt from captivity, but their eyes still reflecting the determination that had made them elite soldiers. Sarah's 5 teammates were there, along with the 2 recent captures that had complicated the mission parameters. The reunion was brief but emotional. Sergeant Rodriguez looked up as Sarah appeared in the doorway of the transport, his expression shifting from resignation to disbelief to overwhelming relief. "Mitchell?" Rodriguez's voice was hoarse from months of minimal communication. "How the hell?" "Later," Sarah said, working to free the shackles that bound him. "Right now we're getting you home." The extraction proceeded with military efficiency, but Sarah couldn't help noticing the condition of her teammates. 3 years of captivity had taken a physical toll, but their spirits seemed intact. They moved with purpose once freed, immediately taking defensive positions and preparing to assist with their own rescue. Corporal Williams, despite obvious injuries, grabbed a weapon from one of the disabled guards and took point position. Sergeant Chun began searching the transport for intelligence materials that might prove valuable. These were still professional soldiers, ready to fight their way to freedom. The helicopter extraction went flawlessly, with all 7 rescued Americans and the 4-person rescue team aboard within 10 minutes of the initial ambush. As they lifted off from the mountain landing zone, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe that the mission she'd begun 3 years ago was finally complete. 6 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell stood in the same Pentagon briefing room where her fate had been decided months earlier. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her 5 teammates flanked her, all in dress uniforms, all bearing the quiet dignity of soldiers who had survived the unthinkable and lived to serve again. Secretary of Defense Hawkins reviewed the after-action reports with obvious satisfaction. "Lieutenant Mitchell, the intelligence your team gathered during their captivity has led to the disruption of a major criminal network. The 2 additional American personnel you rescued have provided information that prevented further attacks on coalition forces." She paused, studying Sarah with something approaching admiration. Your unauthorized actions 3 years ago constituted serious violations of military law. However, the results of your persistence have vindicated both your judgment and your loyalty to your teammates. General Hayes stepped forward with a small wooden box. Lieutenant Mitchell, by order of the President of the United States, you are hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy. The citation read aloud spoke of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. But Sarah knew the real honor was simply having her teammates standing beside her again. 3 months later, Sarah found herself back at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, but this time as an instructor rather than a recruit. The small office overlooked the same beach where she had endured Hell Week, where she had proven herself worthy of wearing the SEAL Trident, and where she had taken the first steps toward bringing her teammates home. Morrison and Brooks, now qualified SEALs themselves, stopped by her office during a break in their advanced training. The arrogance and skepticism of their early days had been replaced by the quiet confidence that came with proven performance in the world's most demanding military units. "Ma'am," Morrison said, using the formal address that Sarah still found somewhat uncomfortable, "we heard about your new assignment. Training the next generation of candidates?" Sarah nodded, gesturing toward the window that showed new recruits struggling through the same obstacles that had once challenged her. "Someone needs to teach them that size and strength aren't everything. That determination and intelligence can overcome almost any physical limitation." Brooks grinned. "Think any of them have your kind of background? Secret agent operatives pretending to be civilian recruits?" Sarah laughed, a sound that came more easily now than it had in years. "God, I hope not. One identity crisis per decade is enough for any training command." As Morrison and Brooks left to return to their training, Sarah opened her desk drawer and pulled out the small leather journal that had accompanied her through 3 years of careful planning and dangerous operations. Most of its pages were filled with intelligence notes, operational plans, and the detailed observations that had made the rescue mission possible. But the final entry, written just days earlier, was different. Mission complete. All personnel accounted for, no one left behind. She closed the journal and placed it back in the drawer. Outside her window, new recruits were discovering what they were capable of when pushed beyond their perceived limitations. Some would succeed, some would fail, but all would learn something about themselves in the process. The woman they had called hopeless had proven that hope, combined with determination and careful planning, could overcome even the most impossible obstacles. And now she would spend her career teaching others that there was no such thing as hopeless, only challenges that required creative solutions and unwavering commitment. In the distance, the Pacific Ocean stretched toward horizons that held infinite possibilities for those brave enough to pursue them. Sarah Mitchell had found her way home, and now she would help others find theirs. The story was complete. But the mission-training warriors who would never leave their teammates behind would continue for as long as America needed people willing to risk everything for the principle that no one fights alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.